Welcome to another episode of Masti with Satvik Saini. Messy hair, don't care. Tonight, we have James Pugliese, or as often as a lot of people like to call him, James. Welcome to the show, James.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Vic. I'm excited to be here and talk about some interesting stuff.
So today's topic of discussion is the financially independent retire early movement, which is also known as FIRE in this cult-like community. Now, this movement is basically around the frugality of life, where people like to save and they want to be financially independent to have that freedom and essentially retire early. Now, that's the crux of this movement. But James, talk to me how you got into this and why.
So I kind of view the movement a little bit differently than how most people would view it. I don't really consider it cult-like as you do necessarily, but for me, it's just like an extension of frugality with a more clear goal in mind. And by that, I mean, the most important thing for me here, I think, is the financial independence. It's really just being kind of secure with where you are financially, so you kind of have the freedom to do what you want when you want. So the retire early aspect for me isn't necessarily just retiring early. It's more just having complete freedom to do what you want. So by that, I mean, there's a lot of really cool jobs out there that don't pay very well, right? You can't really career off that. But let's say you had a bunch of money. Well, at that point, you can just do what you want and not really worry about finances. So again, it's more the freedom aspect that I'm really kind of keen on.
Dude, you hit a great point. So when I discovered this community, I think it was around last year somewhere. And that's the point that stood out to me as well, because retiring early is okay, but like the freedom to do what you want to do and when you want to do it, like without having a boss or a set schedule where like I could take a day off whenever, or not having deadlines, having less stress, because most people work for the paycheck, right? The paycheck is an important part of why they do what they do.
Yep.
To most, I wouldn't say I would say most people walking around probably aren't doing the most thing they're passionate about. Or if you like told them they could do anything, they'd had like a month remaining to live, they probably wouldn't be doing what they're doing.
Exactly.
So in that sense, that's what speaks out to me. So do you have, in terms of why you want to fire, like what type of career would you do if you had like hit a certain number? And what do you do? Actually, James, talk about what you do now and then what you would switch to.
So what I do right now, I'm in product management. So it's kind of a lot of business stuff in terms of like interfacing with customers, developing new products that kind of meets market needs, things along those lines. And I do enjoy it quite a bit. But I guess kind of like things I'd really like to try doing, I think it would be really fun to like be like a river rafting guide. I love river rafting. The guides seem to have a really good time doing that kind of thing. Maybe like other things along those lines, like, kayaking instructor, or maybe even like being like a scuba instructor, things like that. So it's just kind of like basically kind of like those hobby jobs where it's just, like everyone has hobbies, but it's really hard to get paid a living wage to do your hobby. And those that do, are very lucky. So it's kind of just exploring that more and just having the freedom to do so.
So, okay, that sounds amazing. Scuba diving instructor.
Yeah.
Off the coast of like Spain. Ooh. But regardless, so let's say most of the people in this community have a number, and how that works is like they think of a number they want to spend per year and then make that, and then multiply it by 0.04 to make that like their savings withdrawal rate, right? And then multiply, and then get a year number. So what is your number and how do you structure that, and what is the philosophy behind, or how did you come to that number?
So essentially what I did is I just looked at what my current expenses were and how much I could save a year.
And James, get into the numbers if you're comfortable.
Yeah, of course. So essentially, just kind of giving throwing some numbers out there. I estimated that based on my current spending habits, I could save about $30,000 a year. And really using that, I just would go with a target age rather than a target number. Basically what I did is, like, let's look at like 401k. So my company does a 6% match and I do a 12% contribution. And that comes out to about $13,000 a year. 401ks have a $19,000 a year contribution limit. So there is kind of an upper cap on that, but that's kind of what I targeted for that.
Okay.
IRA, Roth IRA, I think that that's also an important investment vehicle as well. I highly recommend maxing that out if possible. And that is a $6,500 contribution limit. And personal savings, I can do about 15,000 a year. So kind of with all that in mind, what it comes out to is like just looking at 401k, assuming a 8% growth rate.
Okay.
And a static contribution. So like this is assuming that any raises or anything like that, increase in salary, will just go towards your current living expenses. So that can kind of take into account like having kids or just kind of increasing your cost of living slightly over time.
Lifestyle inflation, basically, right?
Yes, exactly. So looking at 401k, let's say we have a target age of, let's do 45. So if we do a target age of 45, sorry, I'm just going through this. That's 21 years from now. But at that point, you'll have 800,000 in your 401k. And by the time you're able to withdraw from the 401k, you'd have $3.7 million.
Holy shit.
So obviously that's basically all you need at that age, right?
Yeah, hopefully.
And that's stopping contributing at the age of 45. If I kept that going up to that retirement age, it's quite a bit higher. So it's just kind of like keeping that kind of in mind, right? Like if you, like, let's say you have like $10,000 today, like how much do you think that would be in, I don't know, let's say 20 years time?
With what is the assumption of the growth rate per year?
So I guess let's say 8%.
Okay, a shit ton of money. Probably, I don't know, 500K.
500K. It's closer to like 200 to 300K, right? And that's $1,000. Like, I can actually get an exact number. Give me a second.
So James, talk to me. Do you do anything else besides the investment vehicles of 401k and Roth IRA?
No. So my thing is that I feel like that's kind of enough. Like obviously having multiple avenues for investment is important. I'm going to be buying a house soon, under contract for that. And really the idea with that is that, there's a big argument on rent versus buy. I think it's basically if you're planning on living somewhere for 7 or more years, it's better to buy than rent. So that's kind of just a consideration to have there. And of course, you kind of get benefits later on once you have that equity built. So it's kind of just another form of investment that should kind of be taken into consideration depending on kind of what you're doing with your career and all that.
Yeah. So you don't do like S&P 500 stuff or VTI or any, I know you were into options a little bit. So what happened? Are you off that train now or? Yeah.
So in terms of kind of investments, like the personal savings on that 15K a year, that definitely, my view is that you should have 6 months to a year worth of, emergency.
Yeah.
And after that, I think just tossing it into an index fund,
Yeah.
whatever that you want to go with is obviously going to be the safest and best return. I think historically that's been about a 10% return per year average. So I mean, you can try to play the market. A lot of people find that fun, and I've had decent success over the past few years with that. But again, we also are in a time where we're seeing that the market has been going up quite a bit anyway.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard to argue from one over the other. In terms of options, I feel that is kind of a risk in terms of how it works. I feel like if you want to try it, obviously you should give it a shot. Some people get lucky, but that's kind of the important thing to remember with options is that you may feel like you know what you're doing, but it really is ultimately just lucky gambling if you hit it big there. And if you do hit it big, you can kind of accelerate your timelines in terms of what you're trying to do.
No, that's a good point. The stock market, a lot of people do try to game it. I mean, it's like the house, like the casino, right? It's the house usually wins.
Yep.
And no one really knows what they're doing at the stock market. Sure, people can get like, you can take calculated risk and hit it big here and there, like you're saying. Like a couple of our friends even do options. But most of the time over the long term, it's probably going to be riskier. And that's the thing I want to talk about. Like in this community, the crux of it is basically long-term investing and just wait it out. Like a lot of people want to get rich very quickly, right? But if you wait it out and like index fund, like DCA, dollar cost averaging into that, or 401k, Roth IRA, you'll be pretty much set by the time you're 50. So talk to me a little bit about the philosophy and how you had to change yours from like short-term maybe to long-term, if at all.
So I think a lot of what happens in terms of how people kind of use their money is that, let's say you got a $10,000 bonus today. A lot of people will see that and go, ooh, I should get a new car, or, oh, like I'm going to use this to go on a very expensive vacation or something like that, right? That's how a lot of people kind of view money. And there's nothing wrong with that. My view on that would probably be kind of an 80-20 rule. Spend 2 of it, to kind of do something fun. I think like a fun vacation, help contribute to that with that money would be a lot of fun, or something along those lines. But at the same time, I feel like around 80%, maybe 70 of it should be just immediately invested, right? So that I think that's kind of the difference in terms of kind of how FIRE people view money versus how a lot of people will view money. So another thing would be like, like cost of living or lifestyle changes, right? So say you suddenly got a 30% raise and you're like, okay, well now we can, like, let's say you're living in some house, you have a mortgage on it, and you don't really, like, you have enough space, and you're like, well, we have more money, so we can buy a bigger house. Why not, right? It's just kind of things like that. I guess it's kind of just prioritizing future savings to an extent versus kind of like living as like high in terms of your means as you can. So it's like basically instead of spending all of your money today, it's saving a decent amount for tomorrow.
True. Well, a lot of people talk about this movement as just living below your means and delaying gratification to an extent, which like in engineering economics, of course we both took together in college, which talks about the power of $1 today versus $1 tomorrow, which is huge, right? Because you can invest $1 today. That's why it's worth more. Yeah.
And I think that's something to keep in mind. I don't think you should sacrifice your happiness today for happiness tomorrow. So for me, it's basically like, I have like I have like enough money set aside for entertainment, all of that jazz. Like basically my thing is like, no matter what, like just based on the 401k, like once that hits, I'll be comfortable, in retirement. I think like there's really not much to say on that. Like you basically just
No, that's a good point. So James, that I guess we goes on to my next point, where it's like I guess growing up in India, like Indians, Indians are always very frugal with their money. They're very money minded. So the frugality part of my life, like, was always ingrained in me. Like negotiation, always make the best bang for your buck, whatever that is, right? So for me, like with this movement, I had to learn how to spend money in a way. And like you're talking about, like once I have, like, let's say I get my paycheck, like my deductions go to like Betterment, automatic deposit, Robinhood, got my 401k, Roth, IRA, and after that, I just have like guilt-free money that I can just ball out with. That's how I've been doing it. Because then that money after like I make the investments, after I make the move per month, I'm just like, this money I can do whatever I want with it. And that's how I've been looking at it. So was there a shift in psychology for you? How did you get over that? Do you feel guilty about like balling out? Let's say you and I get $100 dinner. Do you ever feel like, what's your
No,
relationship with money like? How did it change?
like I kind of agree with you. Like I said, I just have specific monetary targets, and after that, it's basically just fun money, right? And like we're kind of like at an age where we're at our, I don't want to say we're at our peak, but like we
close to our peaks.
Like the 20s and early 30s, like that's kind of like that's like the time when you can like do whatever you want, right? So I think that's still important to kind of have that. And yeah, I mean, like, like when you like look at how much money you're just like tossing into like an account that you won't be able to touch for like 20 to 40 years or whatever, and to like like kind of scary in a way. It's kind of just like you're just throwing a lot of money out into the abyss for a while. Like 40 years from now is when I'd be able to get into my 401k, and like that's like twice as many years as I've been alive. So it's very far off. But yeah, it's definitely important to have fun, and I'd argue that if to meet your FIRE goals, you kind of sacrifice, today, it's probably not worth it.
That's an interesting point. I felt like after I really got into the movement, I kind of was like every single week, like living within the number and like, hey, how is this number doing? So like for me, that was kind of hard at times to have that gauge and like, oh, am I having fun? Or like, how much is too much? So how do you find yourself like not living in the spreadsheet and too focusing on the number? Also, were you at a point where you're like, God damn, I'm paying attention to this too much? And how did you snap out of it? If so?
I mean, obviously, getting that credit card bill every month, it's always kind of like better there, but I think everyone kind of feels that way. Yeah, so I'd say I've never been really much in terms of like, like over looking into the spreadsheet. I obviously have kind of like a target spreadsheet laid out in terms of what I'd like to hit at certain ages. But in terms of just like, like budgeting my finances very tightly, I don't think that's necessary. For me, at least, I don't think that's necessary. I kind of know roughly where I need to be in terms of like the bill every month, credit card bill every month, and all that stuff. And if I'm within like certain limits, then I know I'm exactly on track. So I guess that's kind of how I'd put it.
Okay. So let's say on a month-to-month basis, you go over, like, how do you, let's say you balled out too much and went to too many restaurants and bars for last month, considering a hypothetical scenario because we can't go to bars. So how do you reset for the month after? Or do you just like, how do you go about budgeting?
So again, it kind of depends on how far above the, like I went. So like if it's like like a couple hundred like above where I'd want to be, like
Yeah,
I'm not going to be like sweat that too much. But like let's say like I had like a very big like I spent like $1,000 extra.
yeah,
doing something like, like you go on like a vacation or something. Like at that point, you'd want to like cool off. Like I'd probably still like, go out and stuff, obviously, but like, it is important to kind of have that in mind. And obviously that's something I do have budgeted in, which is kind of like fun money, right?
Yeah.
So again, it's kind of not something you should sweat too much. And the reason for that is kind of just how that money works after a certain point, right? So by that, I mean, let's take that example I had of a target age of 45, right? For that financial independence. And at that point, like, you'd probably still be working. Like, it's not like, you hit this target age and you're like, well, I'm going to pack up and quit my job. It's more like you just have more kind of freedom. It's kind of more, I guess it's kind of like just a decrease in stress. But just for argument's sake, let's say at 45, you immediately quit your job, and we were talking about these numbers we had before, 15,000 a year. So at that point, there's a few ways to kind of estimate it, right? So the first one is that basically like how you spend your money. So if you have $1,000 per year savings, you'll have 756,000 in 20 years or so, right?
How many in savings?
15,000 per year savings at an 8% rate.
Yeah.
You'll have 750K saved up in 20 years or so. Okay. So basically at that point, what you are doing with that money is bridging the gap to your next account. So your next account would be your IRA, which is 59. So you basically have 14 years to make 750K work. So
I see.
So let's say you have a 3% growth rate on that money because maybe you don't want to have it in like the stock market or like kind of higher yield investments, because this is now your money that you need to make work for a while. Mm-hmm. If you have $60,000 a year in expenses, which I mean, I only spend like 25 to 30 a year right now. So that's basically doubling my, cost of living.
Yeah.
$60,000 a year at a 3% interest rate, that bridges you just fine to your IRA. You'll have $100,000 left over. Now, let's say you kept it in riskier investments, you can spend even more money. Or you can, like, depending on what you do, you can spend less money. But $60,000 a year, at that point, you could spend like $20,000 a year traveling. That's basically what that number is. It's a lot of money, even at that age. So, yeah,
that's a good point.
It's kind of just like how to go about things, but that's kind of what I see the date as, is like the date where you have that freedom to choose.
So let's say you have that number, you have all your investment vehicles, hit a certain point by 45, you want to quit and be a scuba diver instructor.
No, it not necessarily. I think it would be fun to do that. I think more like at that age, like once you hit that, maybe like, I don't know, you and your spouse or whatever could just, take a year off and travel a bunch, then you can come back, just do some stuff like part-time. You don't really need, or again, maybe you're at a point in your career where you just want to keep going with it because you feel like you're doing what you want to do, and just kind of go along with that. But again, you also have more freedom, because I feel like there's kind of a pressure, in terms of like maintaining job security, where you don't want to kind of speak out on certain things because you feel like, kind of things. Like, let's say, like a director in the company is doing something wrong, right? You're not going to say anything because, well, there's like repercussions, but have a lot more freedom at that point too, to kind of call things out, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Another regard where I was reading this article was like, this could also essentially be like your fuck you number, where you like not put up with shit from the boss.
Yeah.
Or like not put up with a lot of shit that you would have when you really needed that job.
Yeah, you don't have to roll over if that's happening. Like at my job, like it's great. I don't have that issue, but I feel like a lot of people aren't as lucky as I am in that regard, where they'll have a bad boss. I mean, my boss is great. The company has been fantastic, but again, there's still like that kind of like, if there was a problem, would I feel comfortable speaking out due to kind of potential repercussions? And because you don't have that kind of financial independence, you really, it's wiser not to speak out, unfortunately. But once you have that, as you said, fuck you money, you can kind of feel more secure in making your workplace better by tackling those issues head on.
No, that's a good way of looking at it. As far as like, we just discussed it from our 20s to 30s, even though some of the calculations you just ran, like the power of compound interest, especially in our 20s and 30s, is insane.
Yes.
And then once I was looking at this, I was like, this is an interesting point itself, but like the power of compounding in everything, not just money. I was like, relationships. Like, let's say you and I are friends for 2 years and we invest in our friendships over the course of time, that we're still friends by the ages like 60s and 65. Your relationships, your wife, your marriage, your network, and all those things. I was like, wow, like what you do in your 20s, 30s will compound to a magnum effect. Not just money, but like even if you do bad things, like if you burn a lot of bridges, you'll feel the effect of that much later on, and that stuff will compound as well.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought about it from that perspective, but no, that does make a lot of sense and is interesting to think about.
So that's where I was like, the power of compound interest, especially that's if I was like teaching my kid, or if I was teaching somebody new to this movement, or like in regards to like someone comes to me about like saving or investing, like this is the number one thing. This is the most important principle, I think, right? Or what would you say?
I mean, it's basically invest early and use kind of those investment vehicles that are available. Because like the thing is that you kind of need to keep in mind is that like with the 401k and the IRA, like basically like with a Roth IRA, everything grows tax-free, right? And that's like a very important thing. And the distributions are tax-free. So taking advantage of those with your investments, but also definitely if you have spare money, like even if you have like $10 here and there, toss it in, index fund or something, and just kind of let it grow, because it is very important. Like basically, like let's talk about that $10,000 number I mentioned earlier, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's just do a quick analysis on that and see how much like just investing like a couple years early even changes things greatly. So okay, here we go.
Let's hear it.
Okay, so basically in 45 years, right, that's $300,000. In 40 years, it's $200,000. So saving $10,000 5 years early is basically $100,000 extra by the time you retire at 65, or that 401k age. So that's just 5 years. 10 years, right? Let's say you waited 10 years. You're now $170,000 off of where you could have been. So basically, if you start at 20 versus start at 30, you basically will have almost double the amount of money.
True. Actually. I mean, the comparison between like starting investing at 20, 30 versus 40 is just insane. Even if you do the same length of investments, like when you're saying that calculation you ran for $10,000 and stopping at age 45, and what that grows to by the age 65 is insane. So that's why like this is the time for us to have a good ass time, but also just like buckle down and hit those numbers or targets.
Yeah, both are important, and it's a hard balance. Again, I disagree with kind of like, like sacrificing today for tomorrow, because I feel like a lot of people kind of romanticize what retirement would be like. And they may be disappointed and kind of regret kind of what they did. So again, just enjoy the now, but always keep the tomorrow in mind is kind of how I'm living it.
No, that is good because you're always looking for the next, and that's where you kind of can get lost within not be present. But
Mhm.
that's a good point as far as where still able to enjoy the present, but still plan for tomorrow and save for the future
Yep.
you. But
Oh yeah.
not to an extreme in one. That's kind of hard though. That's really hard to have that like psychology and not worry. For me, it was anyway.
Yeah. I mean, it's always going to be kind of one of those challenges that you have to worry about. I do think it takes a certain amount of willpower, obviously, to kind of go down this path. And it's obviously not for everyone. And I mean, it's kind of hard. Like, I unfortunately haven't had like the opportunity to talk to a lot of people that kind of, did things the opposite way, where they spent all of their money early and didn't really save and until like, later on 40s, 50s, and kind of how they feel about things. Because I think at that point, inherently, you'd kind of have some regret because you're looking at your past and say that's a really good time, but really you're now in the present where you don't have that, blanket.
Security. Yeah.
And I think that's why it's just like, yeah, I mean, living, like you can spend all you want right now, but you still will have, things to worry about later.
So hold on to that thought. I want to bring that up afterwards, but something you just said reminded me of like is not for everyone. In that case, what kind of personality do you think attracts towards fire, or does fire bring out a certain type of personality within a person?
I think that it's going to be kind of the more pragmatic, logical kind of thinkers that will be kind of attracted to something like this.
Hmm.
Because from, like a logical standpoint, it makes a lot of sense. If you save now, it pays dividends later.
Yeah.
And I mean, it kind of depends on how, people view things as well. A lot of people like to live in the moment. They just kind of, just kind of, as you say, go hard or whatever. Um, and, that's, and those kinds of people may not be as attracted to doing, since it does kind of sacrifice some stuff today as well. But I don't know, I'd say it's mostly kind of just like the logical brain people, and also kind of people that have kind of been informed and educated on this, because this is something that is necessarily super intuitive. And I mean, it's like, compound interest is how it works, but not a lot of people aren't, they don't dive deep into the finance stuff. They don't really think about it too much or learn a lot about it. So they may not be kind of aware how important it is to actually do like, savings and investments and IRAs and 401ks. Like a lot of people, like I think there was like a study where like 401ks with company match, like a lot of people don't even do the company match. They just don't, like, it's free money,
Yeah,
So
that's free money on the table.
so I think it's kind of like partly a logical thing and also partly just an awareness thing. A lot of people may not have been taught or been made aware of kind of all of these tools that me and you kind of just, live and breathe.
No, for sure. I think the resources might be available. It's just because the internet has, there's so many resources and books available. It's just the awareness thing is, I think, should be taught in every school. Like financial literacy, like I think it's almost like an epidemic here, with like credit cards and student loans and a lot of the like how loans work is just a lot of people could benefit with a lot of financial literacy.
Yeah, I mean, like in the high school for me, I never had any like financial literacy class, because like I think this has been kind of an argument in education. I obviously don't know if they've addressed it, but it's that really don't teach you very well how to adult. They mostly just teach you kind of like literacy, math, history, all that, which is important. But also, once we're out of high school, we're now adults. Like you should probably have like required adulting class that tells you exactly what you need to know. I'm sure some people have had that experience where they were lucky enough to kind of have those classes. I'm sure there were not thinking about it, I'm sure it was like an elective or something, but it should be mandatory rather than something that like, hey, maybe it's a good idea to learn how to do things as an adult, you know? So
No, that's a good point. I mean, the credit card trap is a huge one here too. And dude, there was a story. I remember I was out at a bar, like I think it was in Golden. I forget the place with the amazing margs, Table Mountain Inn.
Table Mountain,
So,
yeah.
and I pulled out a credit card, and some of the guys I was out with, they're like, dude, you have a credit card? How do you like manage, and how do you like not overspend and always go over limit? And I was like, damn, this is actually interesting to some people. Like some people
Yeah.
actually don't know how this works. So I think it would just be vital to understand.
Yeah.
And the minimum payment and that trap and the whole thing. I think a lot of people are in debt because of that. Like credit card
Yeah.
debt's the worst debt to be in.
Yeah. It's definitely, if you can't, I don't know. It's basically, for me, the credit card is just a way to build credit. Like if I couldn't pay it off fully, I wouldn't spend it.
Yeah.
So,
but not a lot of people see it that way. They just see it as like free money, swipe anywhere you go.
yeah. And for some people, it is necessary to kind of like, sometimes like they'll have like a rough month, they'll have to take on credit debt, right? Not everyone is, you know, I guess making as much money as they need necessarily to meet every expense they'll hit every month. So, you know, that's kind of why that credit card debt is a thing sometimes, is that, you know, let's say, you know, you get hit with an unexpected like $500 expense, or you have an ER visit and that's like $5,000 or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, at that point, you know, you don't have the money, you have to pay it. So now you're in credit card debt, right? And
yeah, true.
Unfortunately, it's fortunately deep hole to dig out of at that point, but that's, I think, kind of part of it. And that kind of brings up another point, which is some people don't even have the opportunity to save. You know, they're just trying to make ends meet. So kind of where's the light at the end of the tunnel for them, right? In terms of being able to save and be secure in retirement.
No, that's a good point. Like, I feel like there could be a sense of almost like privilege there. Other people might not have the opportunity to start. Like us two, we have good, great paying jobs, whereas like someone else might. But I think most people, I think you have to believe you can get out of it. Otherwise, I think most people can. And at other times there might be situations where they're really too hard, where they might need more assistance.
I don't know. So imagine this. How do you think you'd manage making minimum wage 40 hours a week, right? So that's like what, $320 a week or $1,200 a month. Is that right?
What's minimum wage? $15?
Well, see that there are, it's probably, you'd probably pretty easily get a job at $12 an hour now, but let's say it's 12, right? 12 times 40 is 480. So about $2,000 a month.
Yeah.
Before taxes, and then take about 20% off that. So $1,600 a month. Like how do
probably
you
less than 20%, but yeah.
Let's say it's $1,600 a month.
Okay.
So imagine you are, let's say you're a single dude, right? No debt, whatever. You have $1,600 a month, right? So let's say you have to live frugally or whatever. So let's say you can live off $200 a month on food, $50 a week, which, you know, I think is fairly cheap.
Yeah, pretty cheap.
So that's, you're not down to $1,400. You
Yeah.
have car insurance and you have to drive to work. So let's say that's another $200. So you're down to $1,200, right? Then housing. So depending on where you live, that could vary quite a bit, but I'd say on average it's probably like 900 here, right?
Yeah, Denver area.
Now you're down to 300. Okay. Well, there's other kind of expenses too. You have like miscellaneous stuff like health insurance and all that, and, you know, entertainment and all that. And you have $300 a month to kind of work with on that. So then let's say you have kids. Let's say you have, you know, a spouse or whatever, and she's taking care of the kids because unfortunately, let's say, you know, you're a family of 4, right? 2 kids and a spouse. And you have $1,600 a month. Well, the wife is going to have to stay home and take care of the kids because daycare is going to be like $50,000 a year, right? So she can't work. She can't contribute income because she has to stay home and take care of the kids. And you're still making the same $1,600 a month. But now instead of just you, who barely could afford to do that yourself, you have to do that for 4 people. So how does that work? How can you have that, like, even the money at all to save for the future?
No, that is a tough problem. I mean, that for those people, like I wish there was some sort of program where they could like better, like have an education stipend where they could just take some courses to better their living and have a more high earning opportunity in some sort of way.
Yeah, and I think there are some social programs that would kind of address that. I'm sure like a family like that would probably qualify for food stamps or something.
Yeah.
I'm super familiar with kind of all the programs, but I mean, that's why kind of having those social safety nets in society is important, because not everyone is as lucky as we are to kind of be in a situation where we can think about saving, you know?
True, but I would also have this conversation with them, and they could probably even it would start. But the power of compounding is even if they're saving away, stashing away $15-20 a month,
That's true.
whatever that course is, if they start making the right, just even inching closer towards a better retirement plan or whatever the case is, all that every little dollar will help in that way. And like even talking to them, like they probably don't want to work. They're probably looking for opportunities to earn more money, right? Have more earning potential. So talk to them about opportunities there as well. Maybe have some sort of schooling or education. And also the background and history depends as well. It's a pretty complicated problem. It's not just their income, and like how they view money is very important too.
Yeah, I guess my view on that is kind of, in those situations, I feel like social programs are kind of needed to kind of help address that. Because I mean, if you have 2 kids and whatever, like at that point you might even be working multiple jobs. I don't know. Like I unfortunately don't know a lot about kind of how stuff, or how kind of finances look like for situations like that, but it's definitely a problem. Because I mean, like, you know, like let's take New York City or something, a place that has incredibly high rent, right?
Yeah.
You know, like how much do you think like you know, like essential like workers, like janitors and stuff, like how much do you think they make versus how much they need to make to like be comfortable enough to like live, you know?
No, I always wondered that. Like New York City is one of the most expensive cities, but also don't think those people are probably living in Manhattan. Those people are probably commuting quite a bit from New Jersey or some other town. Is what they should probably be doing if they're trying to make it work in Manhattan. Living there would be a lot harder.
Like I said, I kind of feel it's kind of weird to like talk about that kind of stuff, just because it's like I'm so unfortunately far removed from it that it's hard for me to imagine it. But obviously it's a problem, and it's still a problem today because I don't know, minimum wage is very low and cost of living is very high, and cost of living kind of like rent, you know, rent prices kind of have just, and housing prices even kind of have been just inflating higher faster than wage increases, right? So you know, in the 50s, you know, you could get like a mortgage for, I don't know, like $10,000 or something, right? And that would be like easily, like on minimum wage, you could afford that. But the cost of housing and prices of houses have just gone up way faster than, you know, like minimum wage has. So there's now a large disconnect between who's able to buy a house today versus 50 years ago. And I think that's also kind of something to kind of keep in mind, right? We kind of just, society has been outpacing itself a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, inflation and all those things are taken into account. But also another thing is I think it's a bit of a culture as well. Like it's very against culture to, let's say, if you're down on your luck, like live at home or like save money that way, or like do some things that would be like, oh my God, he's doing this at his 30 years of age. Like this is so embarrassing. Or like we should, like, that's a notion that probably puts a lot of people into financial trouble, where they try to keep up with like the Kardashians or whatever that course is, like how you should live your money and how you spend your money, which is also ties. I think if you like, I have no problem. Like I'm currently living at home. The reason I'm doing that is for monetary reasons. So I could pay down my student loans. I had a bit of student loans. I could pay those down, and I could have like get up on my feet by the time I'm out. So that's just part of the reason. But some people might look at us like, oh, dude, what a fucking loser living at home in his 20s. Which, sure, to you, if that's the way it is, but to me, it's okay.
You know, it's funny because like in like other cultures, like I think in Mexico even, like it's very normal to live with your family.
Yeah.
For a while, like people will live with their parents, their grandparents, and like that, you know. And I mean, I think Mexico is, I mean, like a poorer country technically than the US, but at the same time, like culturally, that's acceptable, and it saves a lot of money, you know, to do that. But you have a good point. Like in kind of like Western culture, it's very like, you know, like it's kind of like, there is a stigma living
Yeah.
at home with your parents, but I mean it. Like I did that for like 6 months after college, I think, and the amount of money I was able to save, like just extra $1,000 a month, is just insane. And like if you have student loans or other debt, like it's an easy vehicle if your parents are nice about it to just get rid of all that.
True. And I think we should definitely work on destigmatizing that. Like, I'm not to say that I'm going to be living at home for like the rest of my life or anything. Like, I'm probably moving out in the next like 6 months or so. But everything, like, especially during a pandemic, like move back home, save money on rent, things like that, just like should be very normalized. And the part of the reason why is like Western culture is very individual, where very individually oriented, where Asian culture, like Mexican culture, is like in India, everyone lives with their family, dude. It'd be like weird. Let's say if your family lived in Colorado and you were working in Denver and they live like 30 minutes away, and if you lived by yourself in Denver, they would think like you probably don't get along with your parents, would be their first reaction.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, like it's definitely different because like at the same time, it's kind of like, you know, like you also, it's really society that pressures you to move out. It's kind of like, you know, like living with your parents can kind of feel like awkward.
Yeah, to some.
Just, I mean, it kind of depends on like, you know, and that might still be a culture thing. Like, that's a good point, but you know, some people like they definitely need to move out because their parents are toxic or something, and then they don't like they don't have that opportunity to move home either, so they're kind of stuck, or they get kicked out even.
No, true. And like, not to say like everything about living at home is easy. Obviously, there's like parental, like your mom and dad and your relationships, and it's very complicated stuff. Like they still treat you like you were in high school, and you got to like talk through expectations and things like that. You got to work through some problems, but I just think the overall culture.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, this is a big problem. It's pretty twofold, but we went down a rabbit hole. But going back to fire, so I want to talk to you about a little something. Like I'll give you a stat. To raise a kid here from 0 to 18, it costs around $250,000. So in your number and in your spreadsheet, how have you taken marriage, if you want to get married, / if you want to have kids, into account?
So obviously that is kind of a consideration to have. And you know how I said, you know, like my number was like 45 is very comfortable. Kind of just like with the current numbers.
Yeah.
I'd say it kind of depends on kids and quantity of kids, but I'd say it's like, you know, you can kind of estimate it as like $10,000 a year to $15,000 a year. I'd say like, let's say 12,000, and that should kind of hit. Does that hit it? Well, let's say 15. So let's say it's like $15,000 a year per kid, right? This does kind of keep that in mind. I'd say that like target date of 45. I'd say move that to 50 if you have 2 kids, which isn't really that big of a deal. And of course, it depends a little bit. You may still be able to hit that 45 number pretty comfortably, depending on kind of how you do with your career, right? So, you know, get a 3% raise every year. nothing really changes, right? If you have like 3 kids instead of 2, I think that would strain things a little bit because you want the best for your kids, right?
Yeah, of course.
So you got to spend as much money as you need. And this, I'd say the instant you have kids, this is a lower priority. It's still something that's extremely achievable, like the 401k. Don't have to really, it just kind of does its own thing and don't need to worry about it. The IRA and personal savings, at that point, I think it's more of you just contribute as much as you can after everything else is taken care of. So I think that's kind of like the difference you'd have. There's kind of if you don't have kids, there's DINK, double income, no kids.
Yeah.
Really odd parents. Dinkelberg.
Yeah, Dinkelberg.
Dink. That's why he's called that, because they don't have kids. Double income, no kids. Obviously, if you do that, you'll be swimming in money. But I mean, that's kind of your own choice. I think kids would be fun.
Yeah, I was randomly just curious about that and thinking, I was like, oh, if I didn't have kids, I would probably make a lot more and have a lot more money left over. But I was like, at that point, would I even be happier though if I couldn't reinvest that and help grow my kids up and that thing? So kids for me wins out easily, but I could see how some people value that more. You would have a lot more travel money, just to say the least.
Yeah. I'd say that kind of with the kids thing, it's basically you always hit the company match on the 401k. It's just not up for debate. After that, it's kind of just what you have left over should, be reinvested, but always have that emergency fund. So kind of the priorities would, be kids, emergency fund, savings. So
makes sense. So James, for the last little topic of our podcast, talk to me a little bit about the criticisms of the FIRE movement and what are some pushback you have gotten from you speaking to individuals, if at all?
I mean, I think criticism around it can be due to how some people approach it, which is, just living extremely frugal and sacrificing today for tomorrow, kind of how I think we've touched on that a little bit. I think that's one of the main criticisms. Mm-hmm. So some other pushback on it is kind of, well, what if you have X scenario happen, and really it's kind of basically, well, what if a wrench is thrown into the whole thing? And really the answer to that is, so what, because you've been saving so much, you can really 5 years from now, let's say there's a big wrench, right? Well, because I've been saving, I have the money to kind of handle anything that maybe the retirement date or financial independence date gets pushed back, but because of what I've been doing today, I'm able to meet any problems in the future so much more easily. But yeah, I think the main kind of criticism is mostly around what if, well, what if you have 2 kids and then your kid gets cancer and then this happens and obviously well, what if that happened but you hadn't been saving money? That's my question to that.
Yeah, there's a what if scenario for all people involved. You don't know what's going to happen in life, but we don't know what age we'll live to, what's going to happen with our marriage life, our job, or anything. Yeah. And it just takes the money stress out of it, in my opinion.
Yeah, exactly. It's that's kind of how I view this. I view it as kind of just a way to remove one element of stress from my life, right? I feel like one of the biggest things people stress over is money for good reason. Mm-hmm. If I do this, that's something that I don't really need to stress about as much.
I agree. And just for me, the hard part has been just finding a balance between living. I love living in now, making spontaneous decisions. But when I get too much into this stuff, like the spreadsheet, that's why I don't really have a spreadsheet. I just budget, have my investment vehicles, and then I just have guilt-free money after that, as long as I'm making my monthly contributions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. It is tough, but at the same time, I mean, it's like, like a lot of, there's like a lot of statistics out there, but like, like 30% of Americans don't have like any savings at all or something, so imagine how much more stressful that would be. And that's kind of why I feel like doing this is just kind of like, like you talk about living in the moment and all that, but imagine living in the moment, but also having that added stress. Like, it's kind of like, I'd rather have less stress and less money now, I guess. And it's kind of just prioritizing different things. And again, depending on how you live, there's no judgment there. It's kind of your choice on how you want to do things, but that's
True.
just thing.
Your choice, your consequences. But like another part of that you just touched on is like having that cushion for like, even like I want to reach a point where like even giving like $1,000 or $2,000 to like a charity of my choice, and like those things doesn't even impact like where I could help people in a way where like I have that cushion. To me, money would mean less to like somebody who really needs it more in need, which allows me to do and make all those decisions, even like a friend in need and things like that. Like you would have way more power in that sense, even with family, which I
Yeah,
just something I see
you
it.
get more opportunity to give back. And another,
Yeah.
let's say, you hit that financial independence age. Well, maybe you decide to like, what, I want to run a soup kitchen or something and give
Yeah.
that away. Like it's just basically like it gives you so many more options in terms of what you're able to do.
Mm.
That's kind of the most interesting part, because it like I said, I think I said this at the beginning, but it's kind of just about freedom of choice in terms of
Yeah.
what you do to live your life, right?
True.
Like let's say someone gave you $1 billion now, like possibilities are literally limitless at that point. You could start a company, you could start funding into other stuff, you could just travel, you could do whatever, like you could do whatever you want with your life, right?
Yeah.
And he doesn't necessarily buy you happiness, but it buys you options.
No. Yeah, true. I've heard that quote before. And then James, another thing is like, I'm going to read this off to you. I was reading about this and I really like this quote, so I circled it. The FIRE community underscores this point. We don't really need lots of relaxation. What we need is interesting, meaningful, hard activity. And tell me if that resonates with you and how.
So, the quote is kind of implying that FIRE is saying less relaxation, more hard work.
Well, in a way, like people think retiring, actually, I guess we can talk about the definition of retirement. Because a lot of
Yes.
people think retirement is, James, you and I retired, we're just chilling on the couch, watching Netflix, or just swinging golf clubs every day, which you
Yeah.
can for a short period of time. But eventually, you will need some interesting, meaningful
Yes.
activity that you want to do and that you feel a sense of purpose to.
Yes. No, I absolutely agree. I think that, it's nice, like right now, to do that. Like, like when you're in school, getting a summer off to just
Wind down.
you relax, chill, or you get like winter break, relax, chill. I think that's important, but doing that forever, I think you would feel a little lost. I think that
Mm-hmm.
you got to make sure you pursue those hobbies. You got to make sure you have things you're passionate about, because that's really kind of like, I don't say the reason for living, but it's kind of important, So if you're basically just sitting on the, like, let's say like you hit your finance, you hit like your 4%, whatever, and you're just like, well, I don't know what to do now, right? I've seen that happen in the, people talking about that, like, I hit my number, I retired, and I just, like, this wasn't what I was expecting. And
Oh, yeah.
they talk about it a little bit more, and turns out it's because they're not actually doing anything.
Yeah.
And they kind of lost that sense of purpose in terms of that. So like, for me, like, again, it's like, it's not necessarily about not having a job, it's just having freedom, to freedom of choice, I guess is how I'd put it. And yeah, I mean, at that point, like I will still be doing things that are meaningful and not necessarily easy, just because it's, I think, important to kind of keep yourself grounded by having that kind of thing.
No, for sure. And yeah, just to the point of like relaxation, it'd just be boring without, it's not to replace activity, it's to replace it with meaningful activity. That's how I looked at it. So like I could start a business, I could try ideas, have the room for failure, spend more time with my kids, like be more involved in their childhood and not have like a schedule to bound me to. So that's where I thought this quote was very interesting and makes sense because a lot of
Yeah.
people when they fire, they do that couch sitting for like 3 months and then realize how like boring that is.
Yeah. No, you got like retirement isn't like, well, now I got to do nothing. It's now I get to do what I want.
Yeah.
If you go in with the mindset, now I get to do nothing, you're just gonna eventually be disappointed unless you're one of those people that is fine doing nothing all the time, I guess. But I'm sure they're out there somewhere. But yeah, no, you need to have it's kind of like always have a goal. Like when you're retired, what do you do next? What's your next
Yeah.
goal, right? Like I don't know, like mine, like, you know, I'm fairly big into board games. Like maybe like my first one would be like I want to design my own board game, you know, like, and I just put attention and focus on that. Or maybe it's like I want to learn how to paint, or, you know, like you can just focus on whatever. Or maybe it's like, you know, like literally anything. Like I said, it's freedom of choice.
True. And that's what's really attractive to me about it, financial freedom. And like people talk about retirement. I just don't want to be 65 and be able to do that stuff. I want to do it when I'm younger. That's another part that speaks out to me. Like I want to be
Exactly.
40 and be able to have that financial freedom and live the next 20 years while I'm still healthy and I could do a lot of things instead of like old and decrepit and like health problems by the time I'm 70 and raking in my 401k.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's part of it is just having a healthy, active lifestyle early as well. But I agree.
True.
You know, when you're 40, like you can still do a ton of stuff. Like my dad was in a softball league until he was like 60. Like, you
I
know,
love that.
you can still do that kind of stuff. It's just when you hit 65, like it's like a little too close to like being unable to do stuff, or you might be already. So, yeah, I mean, it's freedom of choice earlier, so you get more time to enjoy that freedom of choice. Yeah.
True. It's just shifted what retiring and financial freedom means to me. So that's why I'm attracted to this movement. But anyways, James, thank you so much for coming on, dude. This was a fascinating conversation. Do you have any other final thoughts or words or anything you want to leave us with?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. I guess I don't really have much more to say on it. I think we kind of covered everything pretty well. It's just like, as we've talked about, it's for me, it's kind of just, and it kind of sounds like for you, it's having that freedom to choose what you want to do. So yeah, I kind of, you know, still agree with the FIRE movement. I've been doing or living by its principles, quote unquote, for 2 years now, and it's, I mean, I'm still able to myself. I still get out and do a lot of stuff. You know, can have a fun night in Blackhawk every now and then, and you'll be fine.
Yeah, don't worry, everyone. Every time I invite James to go out drinking, he's still coming out and having a good time. So
yeah, exactly. And I'm not turning down a good time just because I want to save money.
Oh yeah, never. Good time over money all the time. But thank you, James, for coming on. And as always, I'll have this episode out on all platforms pretty soon. Thank you for coming on, dude. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks for having me.